This is a very important point, I think, because we look at this fruitful outcome and many people compare that to a worldly standard. But it's very important for you to understand the biblical standard and then uphold that when you're comparing your good and bad fruit. What's up, party people? So we are back. This is Matthew, week 4, section 3. I had to practice that way too many times. I shouldn't be that proud of doing that. But a better way and a worse way, judge that. We are going to go over this section of Matthew. It's chapters 5 through 7, which includes the first discourse. We are on the last section, which is going to be talking a lot about what Jesus said about judgment, some misquoted verses, just some general things that people are misinterpreting these days to appeal to secular culture, even within the church. Having said that, let's jump in. So much for not judging. Jesus actually ends with verses comparing and contrasting ways that we can live. And he starts off comparing and contrasting ways that we can live. In fact, in chapter 5, in the Beatitudes, he's actually giving a countercultural picture of what it looks like to live. He's blessed are the poor in spirit, not the powerful. Blessed are those who mourn, not the prideful. Blessed are those who meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Who hunger and thirst for righteousness, not oppressors. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So merciful instead of exacting and demanding. Pure in heart, not selfish. Peacemakers, not people that rile things up. What does this look like? But then, we compare and contrast that. Jesus riled people up. So what does that say about what it means to make peace? Very interesting concepts. But as we get into it, one way is judged better than the other. Jesus is saying these things are better than another. That's a judgment. That's a judgment. You could say, well, Jesus, he's allowed to judge. He's Jesus. I say, fair point. But we're also called to judge doctrine and theology and ideas that come into the church and make sure that we are upholding the intent of the law, that we're upholding the message of Jesus. Chapter 7, judge not lest you be judged. Who is Lester? Judge not lest you be judged. Is Jesus actually saying not to judge here? First question. Pause it, figure it out. Is Jesus saying not to judge here? What is Jesus getting at here? So being hypocritical or holier than thou, that's one thing. We're certainly to judge based on other passages and ways in which we're called to hate evil, multiple examples of calling out evil, false doctrine, judging ideas, excommunicating people from the church even. Paul turns people over to Satan. We should approach people in humility and recognize our own shortfalls. We should not be judging people in anger, and we should refrain from judging people if we can't do it the right way. That's true, but that does not mean that we do not judge people. In fact, if there's a scandal in your church and say somebody's committing adultery, are you not supposed to judge that person? Again, there are different ideas for what happens inside a church and outside a church. In fact, we are called not to judge pagans, heathens, people outside the church. This is true. But we are also called to tell them the truth, which can sound like judging. But there are many examples of just saying that. Just see if these fly for you today. Homosexuality is a sin. Being transgender is a sin. Identifying with your sin is a sin. Pride is a sin. How do those go over? That's hate speech now, isn't it? So what do we do with that? We are not to be hypocritical or holier than thou. We are not to put other people down. We are not judging to make ourselves feel good. There are reasons for judging. We need to dig into the scriptures and understand that. But this passage being used to say, don't judge me, bro, that's just flat out wrong. What do the verses, ask and it will be given, seek and you shall find, tell us about God's character? This is an encouragement to be prayerful. This shows us the nature of God, generous and loving, and the nature of prayer. So I think we get this wrong. The prosperity gospel gets this very wrong. There's a lot of ways in which people try to make this about God is my magic genie. If I just want it bad enough, if I have enough faith. The Kenneth Copelands, the Joel Osteens, if you just want it bad enough. That's not what prayer is about. Prayer isn't about asking God for stuff. So, sometimes it can be. Sometimes we do that. But the ultimate outcome is for us to be drawn into God's sovereign plan, submitting ourselves to God's plan. It is true that you will always get an answer, and I struggled with this for a long time. So you pray, and God gives you a yes or a no or a not yet, right? And we've all heard that sermon at some point or another, I feel like, especially if you were raised Baptist. You've heard that sermon. The idea is that sometimes it's a yes or a no, but you always get an answer. You always get an answer. But what if you were always getting yeses? How does that happen? That means that you're living in accordance with God's plan for your life. And so one of the big things that I think is missing, and I read this book, The Valley of Vision, which is puritanical prayers. This book will make you feel like a pile of dog poo if you read it. And it's awesome because the humility that you gain from it, humbly posturing yourself, desperately wishing, desperately wanting to be drawn into God's plan for your life, digging deeper into His Word just to be filled with His understanding, to let it transform your heart, your mind. This humble approach, that's what prayer is. It's bringing us into humble submission to God's plan. It's drawing us into God's plan. It's not us asking for our plan. It's not us imposing our wishes on God, although He is big enough to handle that. But the more that you dig into and are drawn into God's sovereign plan for your life, the more life-transforming prayer becomes. That's my take on it. Matthew 7:13 through 14 show that there's a wide path and a narrow path. Will all believers be on the narrow path? That's a good question, right? Will all people that profess they're Christian be on the narrow path? It appears there are many who do not find the narrow path. Bad news. In fact, the other parables show many people who think they're on the narrow path but suddenly find that they were on the wide path the whole time. So there's even a parable that says these people thought they were on the narrow path, but they actually ended up finding out they're on the wide path that didn't lead to heaven, that didn't lead to the kingdom. Next question. The golden rule, tree and fruit, building your house on the rock. What is the golden rule? Can you repeat the golden rule right now? Go ahead. Pause it. Try. Come on. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's treat other people the way you want to be treated. There is a reciprocity here. And it is the second of the greatest commandments. When Jesus is asked what's the greatest commandments, it's love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind and soul and body. When Jesus is asked about the greatest commandments, it's love the Lord your God. Put God first. Love Him with your heart, your soul, your mind, your body, your everything. Worship God. Give yourself to God. The second rule is love your neighbor as yourself. There's a reciprocity here. And so it's not being nice all the time. We shortcut this all the time to say that it's just about being nice all the time. Being nice all the time isn't even that loving. And if you've had a child, you will understand this one because your child will want to do things that are goofy. They'll want to eat ice cream every night. They'll want to eat pizza every night for dinner. They'll want to stick a fork in an electrical socket because it looks like it might fit. It's not nice to yell at your kid. I'll never forget the first time I yelled at my daughter and she looked at me in shock because she was about to stick her finger in an electrical outlet because I hadn't baby-proofed the house yet. Wasn't nice, but definitely loving. We try to shortcut this all the time. You know, I asked my son, would you want me to take all your candy and divide it amongst your siblings? Sometimes he eats his candy faster than his siblings. Then he's like, well, why do they still get candy? Well, do you want me to take all your candy and divide it up? Well, yeah. I said, if you had more candy than them, would you want to do that? No. Why not? So we shortcut this all the time. It's not that much more complex to say we should be looking out for not just how we can be nice, but what's good for culture and society is not always what's good for the individual. And sometimes individual rights trump societal rights, and sometimes societal rights trump individual rights. But we have to take a look at that because it's about treating everybody the way other people could respectfully be treated. That's actual human rights. There's no such thing as gay rights, women's rights, trans rights. That's all garbage. There's no such thing. Rights are rights. If they don't apply to everybody, it's not a right. That's how that works. You treat everybody the way you'd want to be treated. This destroys the concept of social justice. Social justice is another attempt for us to put ourselves in the place of God. In fact, it's Leviticus 19:15. I'm going to get crucified if this is wrong. Leviticus 19:15, I believe, says, do not pervert justice. Do not favor the poor. over the rich or the rich over the poor. Don't have favorites under the law. The law has to be blind. Destroy social justice. Trees will be known by their fruit. Oh, this other thing on social justice. Vodi Bakum, I just saw this where he destroyed it. He has this awesome book called Fault Lines, and he talks about if you want to look at the biblical idea of social justice and if it's biblical, Jesus tells a parable that directly contradicts this. The parable of the talents in Matthew, he's actually showing that he takes from the servant that has nothing, like very little, has the least amount of talents, but he did nothing with it. He takes from him and gives to the guy with the most talents, because he did something with it. We are called to do something with what God has given us. And if we can't, God is not going to waste those resources. That's a biblical understanding. So it's an application of the rule. If the richest person would have done nothing with his investment, guess what? He would have ended up in the same boat, but he didn't. He invested it. So this idea of equal outcomes is not biblical at all. So anyways, it was just fantastic. It blew my mind. Trees will be known by their fruit. If your life isn't producing good fruit, then you have to question it. I asked somebody not too long ago, what has the grace of Jesus done for you in your life? Like, what can you tell me right now? One, if you can't answer that, then you haven't thought about it in a long time. Two, if you can't answer that, why not? If you're a Christian and you can't answer that, why can't you answer it? Our life circumstances are a product of God's sovereign plan and our choices and habits, right? If they aren't good, you have one of two choices. You can try to change God or have God transform you. Fruit is bad or good when we compare it to a biblical standard, not a worldly standard. This is a very important point, I think, because we look at this fruitful outcome and many people compare that to a worldly standard. But it's very important for you to understand the biblical standard and then uphold that when you're comparing your good and bad fruit. When I was comparing myself to worldly standards, I ended up making more money, and I ended up being able to afford a house and getting married and these other things. And I believe that they were very generous gifts of God for the state of depravity that I was in my life at that time. When I recognized that to do that, I had not been paying attention to my character, that I was not paying attention to how I wasn't prioritizing being a husband and father like I should, that catches up with you eventually. So you need to make sure that you're comparing the fruit that you have to the biblical standard, understanding what the biblical standard is. And that's where the law is actually a good thing, because God's law is synonymous with his created order. It is completely interwoven into his created order. That's the whole trans issue. It's kind of ridiculous, because not only is it denying God's created order, but that's the step where we're trying to impose our ability to create over and above God's created order. We can no more change a man into a woman than we can create an elephant out of thin air. God can create them male and female. He can uphold his created order. So this whole idea also ties into building your house on the rock. If you're anxious, depressed, you're not building your house on God's foundation. God's foundation is the law built into creation. The more we understand that and love the law, the more that it illuminates our lives, and we can understand the standard that we're to live up to. But if we're anxious and depressed, we're not building our house on God's foundation. Get help. If you need help with your anxiety and depression, seek counseling, seek professional help. God gives us these things for reasons, and I'm not denying that there's power in them or that it can help you, but ultimately, thank God for these opportunities that you have to address these issues and recognize that God's in control. That's where your foundation needs to be. So if your life isn't stable, again, measuring by biblical standards, then readjust your foundation if it's off. Do a foundation check. Am I building on the right things here? Many people today ignore their foundation completely. I was very guilty of this, and I've seen this in a lot of people my age, in their mid-30s. They ignored their foundation. They weren't intentional about their foundation, even if they were kind of going the right path. They weren't being intentional about it. And so their foundation might have little things, little cracks, might need some dry lock. So when they hit middle age and it matters, they realize that they feel like they're starting from scratch. And a lot of men are seeing this because their foundation's not built on God, and they were raised by single moms. And I'm not crapping on it, but let's be real. The ideal is a mother and a father for a reason. Fatherlessness is a huge issue. And so a lot of people hit middle age and they realize that the masculinity they were sold is a pile of garbage, or they've built their identity on masculinity instead of God, or they've built their identity on their societal and cultural impact and what they're earning and their paycheck and all these other things. And so their foundation for that is off. And I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but they can disappoint you massively. And so when you get to this point in your life, if you're rebuilding and digging into God's word, set your foundation first. It's the most important thing new believers can do, is just understand, because I think we rush to try to get into theology and understanding and reading the Bible and all these different things. And I think those things can build a foundation, but making sure that you are worshiping and building a foundation of submitting yourself to God first, I think, is the most important part. So this takes us into our theological themes for this video. So we've got God, our Father. We have bad ideas and images and examples of fathers these days. They aren't perfect. Again, this is another one that if you grew up Baptist, I know you heard a sermon about this. But just as a good father exemplifies these roles for his children, God is a protector. He's a provider. He's a coach and a guide. He encourages us to greatness. As I'm saying these things, protector, provider, coach, guide, God is not these things for your sake. He's not doing it for you. God is a father. That's true, and he exemplifies and he upholds his end of the bargain to be a father figure to us, but our response to that is to glorify him. It's about his glory, not about our glory. God is not doing these things for our glory. It is about God's glory. It's about his power and sovereign plan. He is the God that is worthy of that glory. And he shows that by being a good father. He shows that by presenting the law, by giving standards, by giving us hope. So I think that's an important aspect of this God, our Father message that we hear, is to remember, is that it is about God. We imitate his love and sacrifice and even his authority when we spread the gospel message. All authority on heaven and earth was given to Jesus Christ, who sent us out to disciple the nations. So the honor of God's name, honor God's name, humble yourself before God. We're called to humble ourselves and live in God's created order so that it brings glory to his name. Again, it's about his glory. When we pray, we want to humble ourselves, posture ourselves, position ourselves before God humbly and respectfully and honor his name. In the Lord's Prayer, our Father, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Honor God's name. And this also comes out in how you live. When people find out you're a Christian, are they going to be honoring? I got these tattoos a while ago. Where am I going? I got these tattoos. Am I being a good ambassador? I think about that all the time. Posture and humility ties, again, the Lord's Prayer, the law, Jesus' commands, all meant to humble us. Our first step is to posture ourselves properly in the story and submit ourselves to God's sovereign plan. All of these theological concepts are kind of tying in together. God our Father, it's about his glory. The honor of God's name, his glory. Posture and humility ties into how we pray and how we put ourselves before God. Prayer is a powerful thing when we humble ourselves before God. Our identity, humble child of God. Man, the glory of God. Woman, the glory of man, the glory of glories. Literally, woman. Anybody that says woman is the lesser. The glory of the glories. It's like the holy of holies. Is that more holy or less holy? So this men-women thing is just fascinating to me, that this is such a huge deal. But actually, when you have a covenant idea of marriage and patriarchy and this idea, men are not getting the best deal here. It's actually a huge protection for women in society and culture. It's funny to me because we're allowing men to worship themselves and then watching the destruction of society as it happens and unfolds. And then we're intentionally created. When we posture ourselves with humility, we understand these different roles that we have before God. Humble child of God, the glory of God. Man is the glory of God. That should be humbling. Woman, glory of glory. Intentionally created. When we recognize our identity in God, humbly, do we have pride? No. Do we identify with our sin? No. We don't do any of those things. We're partnered. We're created by God. This gives us inherent value as people. We are intentionally created for a mission to partner and create, to reconcile all nations to Christ. Humbly accept your identity in God so that you can authoritatively reject Satan and sin in your own life and the world. Humbly accept your identity. I feel like a lot of our anxiety and all of this is because we don't accept our identity under God. I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. So with that, that's week 4 wrap up. I really appreciate you guys hanging out. Put down below in the comments something that stood out to you. Please comment and like and subscribe. It really helps. Every single one helps, and I really love digging into these issues with you. So I will be praying for you as always, and until the next video, peace.